Thank you guys so much for coming out, and Mom would be very excited to see you guys if she was here. And and this really is a celebration. I'm so thankful for the mother that she was. She gave us an incredible childhood. When I look back on it, I always, like, my childhood was just so much joy. All of us, really, all four of us. We were all I can remember is we were always laughing, and a big part of that was the kind of mother that she was, and she's a big part of the reason why I'm kind of still a big child today. But she was always, through all the struggles, and for many years she was a single parent, but she was truly just a special woman to so many people. And she always, even when times were hard, she always would manage to take us on a camping trip or do something that she could do to give us a good time. And I remember Greg talked about the little convertible, this little bitty rabbit convertible that we used to all pile up into. She'd take us to Chill Highway camping, and there's 4 kids, and she would just we'd pile this car like we were going to stay there for 3 months. And and I can remember looking at this convertible full of stuff and thinking, okay, there's 4 of us, where are we going to sit? There's like no seats, so we'd be tying Emily and Elizabeth to the roof of the car and somehow make it there without getting arrested. But it was always a great trip, and we always had so much fun, and she always taught us to have each other's backs. Me and Josh would fight when we were kids every now and then. We got along pretty good, but she always taught all of us to always be best friends and to always just have each other's back no matter what. And we always did, and I think she really raised us that way. She was really smart, and whenever me and Josh would fight as kids, she would just separate us. And then we'd realize real quick there was no one else there, and it was like we tried so hard not to ever let her catch us fighting, because she was going to put us in separate rooms, and we tried to pass notes under the door, but we couldn't read or write yet, so we were just like kind of at a loss. But she was always, watching us. She gave us freedom, and we grew up until we were about 7. We lived out in the country in South Georgia, and I just always imagined she would just let us run free. We'd be outside all day. She never worried about us. She always gave us freedom. She always trusted us. But she was always watching us from a distance. And I don't think you've noticed that so many times when you're a kid, but I can remember specifically, I was in 1st grade, me and Josh, we always had recess together, and we were little bitty guys. Especially Josh, he was a little bitty baby. But we would always, and I think Mom caught on to the fact that we kind of got picked on sometimes. There were always fights on the playground. So on her lunch break or whatever, she would sometimes be watching us at recess, and I would have no clue she was even there. I don't know how many times she watched us at recess, but one day specifically, I can remember walking, and this big redneck, this kid had a mullet, cowboy boots. He's like pushing me, and I'm getting pushed, and I'm like, hey, stop it, please, leave me alone. And little 3-foot-tall Josh is like, hey, don't push my brother. And
3.5.
He was 3.5 feet, sorry. But I get pushed again, and I turn around, and there's this big kid, he's got this big gut, and he's like, what are you gonna do about it? And Josh over there, hey, don't push him again, I'm warning you. The kid pushes me again, he's like, shut up, guy. He probably thinks he can take both of us. Well, Josh, being the fighter that he is, the kid pushes me one more time, and Josh just balls up his little fist, and I'll never forget, punches that kid right in the stomach, just poof, his whole hand just disappears into the kid's gut, just poof. And here this giant bully just all of a sudden crumbles to the ground and can't breathe, and he falls down and he cries, and as Josh always did when trouble arose, took off running. And I'm standing here, this kid goes like crying to the teacher, just bawling, this giant redneck with a mullet crying. And the teacher comes over and says, who hit you? And the kid looks at him, and we were identical back then. Now I'm way better looking now, but back then we were identical. And the teacher, who hit you? And Josh, or the kid points right at me, he hit me. And I'm like, I didn't hit him. The teacher's like, who hit you? And of course the kid, oh, it was him, I remember, I remember his face, it was him. And I'm like, I swear I did not hit this kid. And of course Mom, was watching the whole thing. I didn't even know she was watching it from the parking lot. Comes up and straightens the whole thing out. Here's Josh hiding behind a tree. She's like, it actually wasn't him, because the teacher's already like pulling me across the playground, screaming at me, and I'm crying, and innocent as usual. But it's just one of those things where she always was a protective mother. She was always watching us, even when we really had no idea. And I don't know how, we watched her struggle for so many years, raising 4 kids, and a large part of that was that, it seemed like most of it, even when she was married to our dad, who was in the military, he'd be gone for a year at a time, so it was a lot of times, it was us and her. And I don't know how she kept up with 4 kids. And sometimes she didn't. You know, we'd be ordering food at the drive-thru at McDonald's and realize that we left Emily. And she went in the car. And we come pull it back in, and here's Emily screaming and crying in the parking lot. You know, oh, you left me again. And we're like, we're sorry. We're so sorry, we forgot to. And so Emily's always the first one to the car now. You'll notice that. And she makes extra sure that she's in the car, Caleb. So if you ever wonder why she's always there, she's afraid you're going to leave her. She just has trust issues now. Sorry about that. But yeah, we saw her struggle so hard. And I can remember nights where she would just be crying herself to sleep because the bills were due and all these things. And being with 2 parents and 1 kid, it's hard. And I can't imagine, you know, being a single parent with 4 kids and having that responsibility, but it was her love that kept her going. You know, all those times that she wanted to give up and she, you know, you just hear her cry herself to sleep, but she always found a way to pull it out. And, you know, like Greg was saying, she was very thrifty. She could, you know, everyone would always be like, how does she survive? How do you guys have clothes? How do you live in this house? How do you have this car? She could take, and I've seen her do this with my own eyes. She would leave the house with a few dollar bills wadded up and a sock full of change, and she'd come back with outfits for everybody, shoes, shirts. I don't know how she did it, and she knew where to go to find a brand new shirt, not an old thrift, like for a quarter. These families, she knew exactly where to go to find these deals, and it was one of those things, and I think she never lost that skill as old as she got. She would always go around and find things for everybody. Like Greg said, she always found things for everyone else. She didn't have much for herself. And she was just always looking out for others, and that was just her nature. But there were some really miraculous things that happened throughout this whole journey. Like, she was misdiagnosed for years. And by the time the doctors, this was 4 years ago, by the time they actually found the cancer, it was stage 4 and it was so advanced that they told us that she had months, maybe even with treatments, to live. You know, and that's 4 years ago. And God really showed up in some powerful ways. And I can remember when she told us in the park over here in Greenbelt the diagnosis. And I knew that this wasn't God's will. I knew God was going to pull her through it. And if you guys saw her, and most of you saw her doing the treatments, they would hear the diagnosis and they would know that she was going through these treatments, but then when they saw her, they'd be like, I thought your mom was sick. I thought she was sick. And I'm like, you know, hey, God is working in a powerful way with her. And she always maintained her beauty throughout the entire ordeal. And as a kid, I can remember not understanding how men thought. You know, when you're an innocent little kid, me and Josh were always right behind her whenever she'd go to stores, gas stations, wherever. And like Greg was saying, he would refer to her as a fox. But she always, I can remember as a kid being confused by every time we were behind her, all these men would turn and just, like, with their mouths hanging open. I'm not making this up. Like, they would just be like, turn their heads like guys are all weird perverts. But they were always checking her out when she walked by. And we're like, Mommy, why are they doing that? And she just shook her head. She knew. But she had some hard struggles and some great people that helped her along the way. But I think one of the greatest things she ever gave us was when she met Greg. He became a great father to us. And it's funny how God puts people in your life when you least expect it. I'm sitting in algebra class, and I was not a good student. I was sitting next to Matt, my brother now. And I remember this so vividly. We're just sitting there in algebra class, and the class is chaos. I'm not paying attention. I'm trying to cheat off his paper probably. And somebody was throwing something, hit something. I just remember he just goes, "Hey man, my mom and your dad, he said, my dad and your mom should get together. They should date." And I'm like, "Isn't your dad married to your mom?" You know? He's like, no, they're splitting up, so it's cool. So we start kind of behind the scenes working out this plot to become brothers and to get them together. And like Greg said, I'll never forget, Greg's trying to be all smooth. He meets our mom for the first time just when we're like picking up and dropping off. And he was smitten. You could tell he couldn't hide it on his excitement to see her when she'd show up. And they were trying to have dinner, and here's Greg trying to be smooth, Mr. Smooth cool guy, and all 6 of us kids were out in the window, just like he said, staring in, like, is it going to work out? It's going to work out. We were so excited to the possibility that somebody like Greg could be a dad to us, and really helped give her a great life. But there's a story that I want to share that right before, in the times leading up to when Mom passed away, especially like the last month, she just seemed to really go down fast. And it was a very difficult time. We were so blessed when the pandemic struck and everything happened that we were able to be home with her. And but she was in a lot of pain. The cancer was at this point in her bones, and it was all over her body, and she was just constantly hurting, even with the most powerful pain medicine they could give her. And in the last few days, it always seemed like that day could be the last day, and we didn't know. So we were always trying to stay right with her. We stayed at the house, and Greg waited on her hand and foot, everything she needed. He was right there. He slept for 10 minutes at a time at the most throughout a period of weeks. But we were all with her in her room, and it was, I think, about 3 days before she passed. And we thought, Uncle Mike was there, all the family was there, we were all around her, and we were crying, and we were praying, and we had music playing, and we were all by our bed. And I didn't know what to pray for at the time so much, because you want her suffering to end, but I know God only brings life, and He only brings every good and perfect gift. So I just put my hand on her while we were all praying, and we're all crying, and I said, God, just show her your angels right now. Just give her comfort. And I was praying inwardly. I did not say this out loud. I just had my hand on her and I prayed that. And she looks up and she says, they're here. They're beautiful. And she starts seeing these angels. And to me, just the timing of me saying, God, just show her, just in desperation, show her your angels. And she looks up and she sees them. And we're saying, describe these angels, and she's telling us they're beautiful and they're here. And they say people can see things before they pass. They see these kind of things. And that's what she thought. You're like, well, she's seeing angels. This is it. This is the last moments. But she didn't pass away that day. She didn't pass away the next day or the next day. It was 3 days later. And she never lost that spunk, that fight. The doctors had come in and they said, hey, she's got a few hours left. So we kind of knew, and I think she kind of knew. But we're all sitting there with her praying and kind of knowing. And she says, I think she was scared in all this, and I think you don't know how you're going to react. But she was scared to fall asleep. She didn't want to leave her children. That's what she was telling us. She didn't want to leave her kids. But she said, okay, I'm ready to go. And it's funny that she got to that point. She said, I'm ready. She goes, go tell my angels to come back. And we're all standing there like, what do we do? And she says, she goes, what are you doing? She says, what are you doing standing there? And she grabs my wrist and she says, quit being lazy and go get my angels and tell them that I'm ready to go. And if you know her, you can't just stand there. You pretend like you're doing what she said, even if it made no sense. I said, okay, let me go talk to him. So I leave the room, we all go out, and I'm like, Josh, she wants us to tell our angels to come back, so we're praying, and we're out there. God, send your angels again to comfort her. And we come back in the room, and she says, okay, they're here. They're back. And she says, they're here, I'm ready to go. And she says, okay, I need some privacy. Y'all can leave. Like, we're going to leave her in there with the angels and that. I said, okay, but that was the one thing we didn't listen to because we didn't want to leave her side. She had a very peaceful sleep. I told her she was afraid to fall asleep. I said, why don't you get some sleep? Because she didn't sleep for days. She would stay awake, and I'd see her. She would start trying to sleep. I'd be trying to comfort her, pet her, get her to sleep, and she'd open her eyes. I said, just rest. And she says, I'm afraid if I sleep, I won't wake up. And I said, Mom, you will. And she said, I don't want to die. And I said, you're not going to die. And I said, either you're going to wake up in this bed, or the Lord's going to wake you up. And, sorry. But that whole encounter really reminded me of a specific, her encounter with our angels reminded me of something that happened to Elijah. He was surrounded by the Syrian army, and he was outnumbered. And he had a servant beside him. And of course, this servant is just terrified. And he's like, we're surrounded. And I think if you're surrounded by all this chaos and all this confusion, it can be scary. And Elijah prayed, and he said, Lord, open my servant's eyes so that he can see. And Elijah's servant's eyes were opened. And when he looked, he saw the hills were full of chariots and fire and angels. And Elijah told him, he said, greater is the one that's with us than those ones that's with them. And Elijah already knew those angels were there. They were always there. But he prayed that God would open his servant's eyes so that he could see it. And I think that my mother, when her eyes were open, she saw God's angels, just like when Elijah had his servant's eyes open to it. And it was just a powerful witness to me. And there's one thing I wanted to share when I was grieving this situation. And God kind of shows you things. Mom always told me, she's like, God's got a ministry for you. He's got something for you to do. And I'd always say, maybe when I'm older and more mature, maybe he does. Maybe I can grow up into that. And then I turn around and realize I am older. I'm just not mature yet. I was praying, and I was just asking God for comfort. And he revealed something to me, and I want to share this if I can get through it. It was powerful. God showed me something, and as I was grieving my mom, he said, Psalm 22 is a mother's love. And I had studied Psalm 22 for a while, and I've done some videos on that and some teachings on it. But it kind of struck me that God said Psalm 22 is a mother's love, because if you're familiar with Psalm 22, it's a song over nearly 3,000 years old. It's about the crucifixion of Jesus. It describes the crucifixion of Jesus, the sacrifice that God gave when he gave his son. So at first, when God revealed that to me, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. But I started reflecting on what I had learned about Psalm 22. It begins, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is the words Jesus quoted on the cross. And I used to think those words were original to Jesus on the cross. I thought he was just saying that. But that was a very popular Hebrew psalm, and all the people knew he was quoting this psalm about the Messiah. It said that if you read Psalm 22, it says they'll pierce his hands and his feet, that all of his bones are on display. It describes every detail, that they cast lots for his garments. It describes a Roman crucifixion that hadn't even been invented yet. But all these people knew that when Jesus started quoting it. That this psalm had a detail in it that God shared with me about this worm. There's a verse in Psalm 22 that says, I am a worm and not a man. And that worm that is in this psalm is describing the crucifixion in vivid details. Most people know this crimson worm because it's a specific type of worm. It's crushed for its red dye, and that's how most people know it. They use it to dye clothes a certain color red. Well, but the life cycle of the crimson worm, this mother crimson worm, is incredible. And this is what God showed me. This is a mother's love. And it's kind of crazy. I'd never heard of anything like this. But the crimson worm, when she's going to give birth to her children, she attaches herself to a tree. Sound familiar? She's giving birth, she attaches herself to this tree, and there's no going back. Once she attaches herself to this tree, you can't take her off without killing her. So here's this worm used to describe the crucifixion, and it's a mother, crimson worm, that attaches itself to a tree for its children. And her children are born underneath her protective covering, and just like a mother that protects her children. This so perfectly describes a mother's love, and it's used to portray what Jesus did for us. But these children are underneath their mother's protective shell, this crimson worm. And they literally feed off the living body of their mother while she's attached to this tree. And that sacrifice, to me, it's incredible. That's what a mother does. When a mother has her children, there's no going back. She is going to give the rest of her life to her children. She is going to sacrifice everything for her children, just like this crimson worm. And it sounded strange to me that this worm would intentionally do that. Attach itself to this tree. It's not going to survive. The children are going to feed off this mother. But when she dies, something special happens. She oozes this crimson red dye that covers her children for the rest of their lives. They are stained crimson red because of their mother's sacrifice. And when I look at what our mother did, she gave up her whole life. Her life could have been so different. You know, a mother doesn't have to stay with her kids. She doesn't have to do these things. But she willingly gave us that sacrifice. And the sacrifices that she did and the love that she shared with us will cover us for the rest of our lives, just like this crimson worm in Psalm 22 that describes the crucifixion. And I think it's incredible that God uses that love of a mother to show the love of his son that he gave for us, who willingly attached himself to a tree for us. And that was just something I had to share, and I'm glad I was able to make it through it, because that sacrifice just so much reminded me of what she did for us. And I tried to write everything down so that I would not leave anything out. And I think I've just about covered everything. But our mother would always want to pray for anyone whenever they needed it. She always asked God for discernment, and she always had it. She knew when something was wrong. With me, I could not lie to her. If I ever walked up and there was something wrong, I was trying to put on a show, she'd be like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, what are you talking about? But she knew I could never, we had this thing, I could never lie to her. And she always would say that I was the mischievous one and Josh was the innocent one. And he did a really good job of pretending to be that. You know, there were so many times, and I thought it was funny, where I somehow always, I guess I looked like I was guilty, so I would get caught more than he would, and he just looked like this little happy angel kid, you know, and so many times, he was a lot of times not as innocent as me at all, and we always did the exact same things. Whatever I did, he did. And, but I would get caught, and I can remember her being like holding Josh under her arm, like, "Why can't you be like Joshua?" And he's over there like, "Yeah, why can't you be like me?" You know. But on the other side, he's like, "Do not tell." So, and I never snitched him out. It was a brother thing. So to this day, she always thought at least she had that one innocent, pure, golden child son. And so I was tempted as we knew it was her last days to be like, "Hey, Mom, remember when you thought he was the innocent one?" Well, but I didn't. I saved her so that she would go thinking that. She was a very special woman who always, you know, like Greg said, she had her thorns. She was difficult to deal with at times. But she was such a loving mother, and she was just, she always talked about how good we were as kids and how me and Josh especially helped her out. And then there was Elizabeth and Emily, who ended up being just like her. But she always gave everything for us, and she always sacrificed so much. And I'm glad we were all able to be here and really recognize her life and what she did. And my brother prepared a slideshow, and I said, "You cannot show it before we talk, or I will not be able to talk. I won't be able to speak." And he's going to share that. And I encourage you guys, if you ever need prayer, if you ever need anything, come to us. Mom was always big on prayer with anybody that needs it, an altar call. And I want to continue that legacy of just being aware, being discerned of other people's hearts, and really looking out for them. So if you ever need any prayer or anything, just fellowship, come see us. At any time, call me. I never sleep. It runs in the family. Uncle Mike can tell you that she named me after her brother Michael, which was very prophetic when you come to realize the man that he would become and the influence he would have on my life. And at the time when she named me after Michael, he was a fun guy, but he wasn't this spiritual leader guy, this witness like he is today. So it's really funny how things work out. And I wouldn't have it any other way. But Josh, if you would, he's going to share a slideshow of her life that he's worked really hard to put together. Hopefully there's no technical problems with that.
It'll work.